The wind howled through the mountains with such fury that Dahlia Green thought the roof might tear clean off her cabin. And when she opened the door at dawn to survey what the storm had destroyed, she found a cloth-wrapped bundle sitting on her porch that smelled like fresh bread and bacon. Her stomach clenched with hunger so fierce it made her dizzy, but pride straightened her spine as she looked around the clearing, searching for whoever had left this charity on her doorstep. The pine trees swayed in the early morning breeze, revealing nothing. No horse tracks in the mud, no figure disappearing into the forest. She stood there in her patched dress with her dark hair whipping around her face, 22 years old and stubborn as the day was long, and she almost left that bundle sitting right where it was. But hunger won out, just barely. Dahlia snatched up the bundle and carried it inside, telling herself she would find out who was leaving these offerings and return every cent they were worth. This was the third morning in a row now. The first time, she had convinced herself it was a mistake, that someone had left supplies at the wrong cabin. The second time, she had spent an hour searching the woods, calling out to whoever thought she needed their pity. Today, she unwrapped the cloth with shaking hands and found cornbread still warm from the oven, strips of crispy bacon, and 2 fresh eggs carefully nestled in a tin cup. Fort Garland, Colorado was not a place for the weak, and Dahlia had learned that lesson harder than most. The year was 1878, and she had been living alone in this cabin for 8 months now, ever since her father had died of pneumonia the previous winter. She had no siblings, no other family to speak of, and the small homestead her father had claimed was barely sufficient to keep one person alive, much less prosperous. The vegetable garden had failed in the late frost. The 3 chickens she owned had stopped laying weeks ago. The goat had broken its leg and had to be put down. Everything that could go wrong had gone wrong, and now she was surviving on wild berries and the occasional rabbit she managed to trap. She should have asked for help. The people of Fort Garland were decent enough, and there were families who would have taken her in, found her work, helped her through the winter. But every time Dahlia thought about walking into town and admitting she could not manage on her own, something in her chest turned to stone. Her father had raised her to be independent, to stand on her own 2 feet, to never bow her head to anyone. Asking for charity felt like betraying everything he had taught her, like admitting she was too weak to survive in this harsh land. So instead, she accepted mysterious gifts from an unknown benefactor and pretended this was somehow different. Dahlia ate the food slowly, savoring every bite, trying to make it last. The bacon was perfectly salted, the cornbread had a hint of honey, the eggs were cooked just right. Whoever was doing this knew how to prepare a proper meal. When she finished, she wrapped the cloth carefully and set it aside, determined to wash it and return it. She had her pride, after all, even if it was a battered and somewhat hypocritical pride at this point. The morning chores took longer than usual because she was weak from hunger, but Dahlia forced herself through them anyway. She hauled water from the creek, chopped firewood, tended to the sad remains of her garden, and tried to repair the section of fence the storm had knocked down. By noon, she was exhausted and frustrated, her hands bleeding from splinters, her back aching from the labor. She sat down on the porch steps and put her head in her hands, allowing herself exactly 1 minute of despair before she would get up and keep going. That was when she heard the horse. Dahlia's head snapped up, and she saw a rider approaching through the trees. Her first instinct was to run inside and grab her father's old rifle, but something made her wait. The rider was moving slowly, carefully, and as he drew closer, she could see he was leading a pack mule loaded down with supplies. He was tall in the saddle, wearing a worn leather hat that shadowed his face, and he rode like someone who had spent his entire life on horseback. When he was about 20 yards away, he stopped. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a polite gesture and called out, "Morning, miss. Name is Lucas Vance. I have been working the cattle drive routes between here and Santa Fe. Thought you could use some supplies." His voice was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. Dahlia stood up, crossing her arms over her chest. "I do not need charity, Mr. Vance." "Did not figure you did," he replied calmly. "But I have got more than I can carry, and it seems a shame to let good food go to waste. I would be obliged if you would take it off my hands." It was a polite fiction, and they both knew it. Dahlia narrowed her eyes, studying him more carefully. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with broad shoulders and capable hands, the kind of man who made his living through hard work and knew how to handle himself in rough country. There was something about the way he sat his horse, patient and unhurried, that made her think he would wait all day for her answer if necessary. "You have been leaving food on my porch," she said. It was not a question. Lucas nodded slowly. "Yes, madam. I have been camping up in the high country, and I pass by here most mornings on my way to check the cattle. Seemed like you might appreciate a hot meal now and then." "How did you know I needed anything?" "Saw you in town about a month back," he said. "You were trying to sell some of your father's tools to the general store. The way you looked at the food supplies, I could tell things were hard. No shame in that. These mountains do not make it easy for anyone." Dahlia felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. So he had been watching her, pitying her, seeing her weakness. "I do not need your pity, Mr. Vance. I am managing just fine on my own." "I can see that," he said, and there was no mockery in his tone, just a simple acknowledgement. "But managing and thriving are two different things. I am not offering charity. I am offering neighborly help. The kind folks are supposed to give each other out here when times are tough. I do not even know you." "That is fair enough," Lucas agreed. "But I know your father was Daniel Green, and he helped my uncle out of a tight spot about 5 years back when some rustlers tried to make off with his herd. My uncle never forgot that kindness. When I heard Daniel had passed and you were up here alone, I figured it was time to return the favor." Dahlia's anger deflated slightly. She remembered her father mentioning something about helping a rancher named Vance, though she had been younger then and had not paid much attention. "Your uncle could have come himself if he wanted to repay a debt." "He would have, but he died last spring." Hart gave out. "Before he passed, he made me promise I would look after the folks who had been good to him. That includes you." The sincerity in his voice made something crack in Dahlia's carefully constructed walls. She looked away, blinking hard against the sudden burning in her eyes. "I do not want to be anyone's burden," she said quietly. "You are not a burden," Lucas said firmly. "You are a woman trying to survive in hard country, and there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely given. My uncle taught me that pride is a fine thing, but it can also be the thing that kills you when winter comes and your cupboards are bare." Dahlia was silent for a long moment, warring with herself. Everything in her wanted to refuse, to send him away, to prove she could make it on her own. But the truth was, she could not make it on her own. Not anymore. The food he had been leaving was probably the only thing keeping her alive at this point, and if this was about repaying a debt to her father rather than pitying her, maybe that made it slightly more bearable. "What is on the mule?" she finally asked. "Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, and some dried fruit," Lucas said. "Also some chickens. I heard yours stopped laying. These are good layers, already proven, and there is a young milking goat. She is gentle and should produce well for you." Dahlia's throat tightened. Those supplies represented weeks of food, maybe months if she was careful. and fresh eggs and milk would make all the difference in the world. But accepting this much felt like admitting defeat, like proving she was too weak to survive without a man's help. Lucas seemed to sense her internal struggle. "Miss Green, I am not trying to take anything from you by offering this. Your independence, your pride, your father's memory, none of that changes because you let someone help you through a rough patch. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is accept help when they need it, so they can live to fight another day." His words were so similar to something her father might have said that Dahlia felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away furiously, but not before Lucas saw them. He had the good grace to look away, giving her a moment to compose herself. "All right," she said finally, her voice rough, "but I will repay you, every bit of it. I do not know how yet, but I will find a way." "There is no debt," Lucas said gently. "But if it makes you feel better to think of it that way, we can settle up later. For now, where would you like me to put these supplies?" Dahlia directed him to the small barn behind the cabin, which was mostly empty now that her father's horse was gone. Lucas worked efficiently, unloading the supplies and setting up a pen for the chickens and a stall for the goat. He moved with the easy competence of a man who had done this kind of work 1,000 times before, and despite herself, Dahlia found herself watching him more than she should. He was handsome, she had to admit, with strong features and eyes the color of warm honey. His hands were scarred and calloused from hard work, but they were gentle when he handled the animals, speaking to them in a low voice that seemed to calm them. There was something solid and reassuring about his presence, like he was a man who could be counted on in a crisis. When everything was unloaded and arranged, Lucas straightened and wiped his hands on his pants. "The chickens will need a few days to settle in before they start laying regularly, but they should do well for you. The goat's name is Clover. She likes having her ears scratched." "Thank you," Dahlia said, and she meant it, even if the words felt like they were being dragged out of her. "This is very kind of you. Like I said, it is just neighborly." Lucas looked around the property, his gaze taking in the broken fence, the struggling garden, the general air of disrepair. "If you need any help with repairs or maintenance, I am usually in the area most mornings. I would be happy to lend a hand." "I can manage," Dahlia said automatically, then caught herself. She had just accepted a mule's worth of supplies from this man. Maybe she could afford to bend just a little further. "But if you are passing by anyway, I suppose I would not mind some advice on fixing that fence. The storm damage is worse than I thought." A slight smile touched Lucas's lips, like he knew exactly how hard it was for her to make that small concession. "I will take a look at it before I go, if you have got the time." They spent the next hour working on the fence together, Lucas showing Dahlia how to reinforce the posts so they would hold better in the next storm. He was a patient teacher, explaining things clearly without making her feel ignorant or incapable. They did not talk much beyond what was necessary for the work, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. When the fence was repaired, Lucas mounted his horse and tipped his hat to her again. "I will be by tomorrow morning, just to make sure Clover is settling in all right. If you need anything before then, my camp is about 2 miles up the North Trail, near the big lightning-struck pine. You are welcome there anytime." "I will be fine," Dahlia said, but there was less bite in her voice than before. "But thank you for everything." Lucas nodded and rode away, and Dahlia stood watching him go until he disappeared into the trees. Then she went inside, opened a sack of flour, and realized she was smiling for the first time in weeks. Over the next few days, Lucas stopped by each morning, always with some excuse about checking on the animals or needing to rest his horse. He never stayed long, never pushed himself on her, but his presence became a steady, reassuring constant in Dahlia's life. She found herself looking forward to those visits, to the sound of his horse's hooves on the trail, to the low rumble of his voice as he greeted her. They worked together sometimes, repairing the cabin's roof, clearing brush from around the property, improving the chicken coop. Lucas had a wealth of practical knowledge about surviving in the mountains, and he shared it freely, teaching Dahlia things her father had never gotten around to showing her. How to read the weather in the clouds, where to find the best wild herbs for cooking and medicine, how to set snares that would actually catch rabbits. But it was the small things that surprised Dahlia the most. The way Lucas always asked her opinion before doing something on her property, respecting that it was her land, her decision. The way he brought her coffee in the mornings, exactly the way she liked it, after she had mentioned offhandedly that she preferred it strong and black. The way he listened when she talked about her father, her memories, her fears about the future, without trying to fix everything or tell her she was wrong to feel what she felt. One morning, about 2 weeks after their first meeting, Dahlia woke to find not just food on her porch, but a small bunch of wildflowers tied with a piece of grass. Her breath caught in her throat as she picked them up, purple columbines and Indian paintbrush, the kind that grew high in the meadows where the air was thin and sweet. Lucas would have had to ride for hours to gather these. When he arrived later that morning, Dahlia had the flowers in a jar on her table. She saw him notice them through the open door, saw the way his ears turned slightly red, but neither of them mentioned it. Instead, they worked on expanding her vegetable garden, turning the soil and planning what to plant for a late summer crop. "You know a lot about gardening for a cowboy," Dahlia observed, wiping sweat from her forehead. Lucas shrugged. "My mother had a big garden back in Texas. She made sure all us kids knew how to tend it properly. Said a man who could only do one kind of work was only half useful." "How many siblings do you have?" "Had 3 brothers and 2 sisters," Lucas said, his voice going quiet. "Lost one brother to fever when he was young and another at Shiloh. The rest are scattered across Texas and New Mexico. I have not seen them in a few years." "Do you miss them?" "Every day," he admitted. "But the war changed things, made it hard to go back to the way things were before. So I kept moving, kept working, tried to find a place that felt like home again." Dahlia understood that feeling better than she would have liked. "Have you found it? A place that feels like home?" Lucas looked at her for a long moment, something intense and unreadable in his eyes. "Starting to think I might have," he said softly. The air between them suddenly felt charged, weighted with meaning, and Dahlia's heart began to pound in her chest. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words would not come. Instead, she looked away, back to the garden, trying to calm the flutter in her stomach. They worked in silence for a while longer, but something had shifted between them. Dahlia was acutely aware of Lucas's presence beside her, the strength in his arms as he worked, the way the sun caught the lighter streaks in his brown hair. When their hands accidentally brushed reaching for the same tool, she felt a jolt like lightning run up her arm. That night, alone in her cabin, Dahlia admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for days. She was falling in love with Lucas Vance. It was foolish and impractical and probably dangerous for her heart, but it was happening anyway. She barely knew him, really, just a few weeks of morning visits and shared work. But he had shown her more kindness and respect in that short time than most men showed in a lifetime. He saw her as capable and strong, even while helping her when she needed it. He made her laugh. He made her feel safe. And when he looked at her sometimes, with that quiet intensity in his honey-colored eyes, she felt like maybe she was not just surviving anymore, but actually living. The problem was, she had no idea how Lucas felt about her. He was kind and helpful, but he was that way with everyone, from what she had heard in town. Maybe she was just another obligation to him, another debt he was repaying to his dead uncle. The thought made her chest ache, but she could not shake it. A few days later, Dahlia needed supplies she could not get from Lucas's gifts, so she hitched a ride into Fort Garland with a family heading to town. The settlement was small but bustling, serving the nearby army post and the scattered homesteaders throughout the valley. She went to the general store first, carefully counting out her precious few coins for salt and thread. The shopkeeper, a friendly woman named Mrs. Patterson, smiled at her. "Good to see you looking healthier, Dahlia. We were worried about you for a while there." "I am doing better," Dahlia said, which was true. The regular meals had put color back in her cheeks and strength back in her limbs. "I hear Lucas Vance has been helping you out," Mrs. Patterson said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp with curiosity. "That is good of him." "He is a fine man, that one. Very reliable." "He has been very kind," Dahlia agreed carefully, not wanting to feed the town gossip mill any more than necessary. But Mrs. Patterson was not finished. "You know, several of the single ladies in town have had their eye on him since he started working this territory. But he has never shown interest in any of them, always keeps to himself. Until now, anyway." Dahlia felt her cheeks heat. "He is just being neighborly, paying back a debt to his uncle." Mrs. Patterson gave her a knowing look. "Honey, I have seen the way that man looks at you when you come to town together. That is not obligation. That is something else entirely." Before Dahlia could respond to that startling statement, the store door opened and a group of rough-looking men walked in. They had the hard, dangerous air of men who lived on the wrong side of the law, and Mrs. Patterson's friendly expression immediately turned wary. The leader of the group, a man with a scar running down his left cheek, looked around the store with calculating eyes. His gaze landed on Dahlia and stayed there, making her skin crawl with discomfort. "Well now," he said, his voice carrying an unpleasant edge, "what do we have here?" "You are Daniel Green's daughter, are not you?" Dahlia straightened her spine, refusing to show fear. "I am. What of it? Your father owed my boss some money before he died," the man said, moving closer. "Gambling debt, $500. I am here to collect." Dahlia's heart sank. Her father had enjoyed cards, but she had no idea he had been in debt. $500 was a fortune she could never hope to pay. "My father never mentioned any debt to me." "Well, he would not, would he? But debt does not die with a man. It passes to his kin. So you owe us, little lady." The scarred man smiled, showing yellow teeth. "Of course, if you cannot pay in cash, I am sure we can work out another arrangement." The implication in his voice made Dahlia's stomach turn. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "Now you listen here, Jack Hutchins. You cannot just come in here making threats. Sheriff Harris will have something to say about this." "Sheriff Harris knows when to mind his own business," Hutchins said coldly. "This is between me and Miss Green. We will expect payment within the week, or we will come to collect it ourselves." He turned and left, his men following him out. Dahlia stood frozen, her mind racing. She did not have $500. She did not have $50. And she did not believe for a second that her father had actually owed these men anything. This was extortion, plain and simple, targeting her because she was alone and vulnerable. Mrs. Patterson put a hand on her arm. "You need to tell Lucas about this, and the sheriff. Those men are dangerous." "I can handle it," Dahlia said automatically, but her voice shook. "Pride is going to get you killed," Mrs. Patterson said bluntly. "This is not the time to be stubborn. Those men are part of the Hutchins gang. They have killed people before and will do it again without thinking twice. You need protection." Dahlia wanted to argue, but she knew Mrs. Patterson was right. This was beyond her ability to handle alone. But the thought of running to Lucas, of proving that she was indeed too weak to survive without a man's help, made her want to cry with frustration. She left the store in a daze and walked toward the livery stable where she was supposed to meet her ride back to the cabin. But before she got there, a familiar voice called her name. "Dahlia, what is wrong?" She turned to find Lucas approaching, concern written all over his face. He must have been in town for supplies as well, though she had not seen his horse. The moment she looked at him, all her carefully held composure crumbled. The fear, the frustration, the overwhelming sense of being trapped came flooding out. "These men," she said, her voice breaking. "They came into the store. They said my father owed them money, a gambling debt, $500. But I know my father would never have left me in debt like that without telling me. I think they are trying to extort me because they think I am an easy target." Lucas's expression went dark, dangerous in a way Dahlia had never seen before. "What men? Describe them." She did, and as she talked about Hutchins and his scar, she saw Lucas's jaw clench. "I know that gang," he said grimly. "They have been causing trouble all through this territory. Rustling cattle, robbing travelers, worse. They are right that your father never owed them anything. This is just their way of trying to take what they want." "What am I going to do?" Dahlia asked, hating how helpless she sounded. Lucas was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "You are going to let me help you. Not because you are weak or incapable, but because sometimes it takes more than one person to stand against men like this. Will you trust me?" Dahlia looked into his eyes and saw not pity but respect, saw a man who believed in her strength even while acknowledging the reality of the danger. "Yes," she said. "I trust you." "Good." Lucas took her arm gently. "First, we are going to talk to Sheriff Harris and get his take on this. Then we are going to make sure you are not alone at that cabin until this is settled. Either you come stay at my camp or I move my camp closer to your place. Your choice." "I am not leaving my home," Dahlia said immediately. "Then I will be your neighbor for a while." Lucas's tone left no room for argument. "And Dahlia, those men will not touch you. I promise you that." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something warm bloom in Dahlia's chest despite the fear. She let him guide her to the sheriff's office, where they explained the situation. Sheriff Harris was sympathetic but not particularly helpful. "The Hutchins gang is slippery," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We know they are operating in the area, but catching them in the act is another matter. If they come after you directly, we can arrest them. But threats? Hard to prove in court." "So you are saying she is on her own?" Lucas asked, his voice hard. "I am saying be careful and be prepared," the sheriff replied. "Keep your rifle loaded and do not go anywhere alone. If they make a move, come get me right away. I will do what I can, but my jurisdiction is limited." It was not the answer they wanted, but it was the answer they got. As they left the office, Lucas said, "I am riding back with you, and I am not leaving until this is resolved one way or another. What about your work? The cattle drives?" "Can wait," Lucas said shortly. "You are more important." The simple declaration made Dahlia's heart skip a beat. Before she could respond, Lucas had already started toward the livery to get his horse. She followed, her mind whirling with emotions she did not know how to process. They rode back to her cabin together in the late afternoon light, Lucas's presence beside her both comforting and unsettling. When they arrived, he immediately set about making the place more secure, checking the windows and doors, ensuring her rifle was clean and loaded. "You know how to shoot?" he asked. "My father taught me," Dahlia confirmed. "I am a fair shot, though I have not practiced much lately." "We will fix that tomorrow," Lucas said. "For tonight, I am going to set up camp about 50 yards from your cabin, close enough to hear if you call out. Keep your doors locked and your rifle by your bed. If you hear anything suspicious, anything at all, you fire a shot and I will come running." The idea of Lucas sleeping so close, watching over her, made Dahlia feel safer than she had in months. But it also made her acutely aware of him in a way that had nothing to do with fear or danger, and everything to do with the way her pulse quickened when he was near. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know this is above and beyond any debt your uncle owed my father." Lucas stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. "This stopped being about my uncle's debt weeks ago, Dahlia. Surely you know that." Her breath caught. "Then what is it about?" "You," he said simply. "It is about you. About the way I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the first time I saw you in town, so proud and stubborn and determined not to let this land break you. About the way I started finding excuses to ride past your cabin every morning just to see you. About the way I feel when I make you smile, like I have done something worthwhile in this world." Dahlia's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. "Lucas." "I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I need you to understand that I am not here out of obligation. I am here because I want to be, because the thought of something happening to you makes me half crazy. If that makes you uncomfortable, I apologize, but I could not keep pretending otherwise." For a moment, Dahlia could not speak. All her walls, all her carefully constructed defenses, crumbled under the sincerity in his voice. "It does not make me uncomfortable," she finally whispered. "It makes me feel less alone, less foolish for feeling the same way." Lucas's eyes widened. "You feel the same way?" "I did not want to," Dahlia admitted. "I told myself you were just being kind, that I was reading too much into it. But yes, I feel the same way. You make me feel safe and seen and valued, not despite my independence but because of it. And that is something I never expected to find." "Dahlia." Lucas breathed her name like a prayer. He reached up slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. "Can I kiss you?" She nodded, not trusting her voice, and then his lips were on hers, and the whole world seemed to fall away. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but then Dahlia leaned into it and it deepened, becoming something fierce and passionate that spoke of all the longing and fear and hope they had both been carrying. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "We are going to get through this," he said quietly. "The Hutchins gang, the threats, all of it. And when we do, I want to court you properly. Take you to church socials and dances. Let everyone in Fort Garland know that you are mine and I am yours if you will have me." "I will have you," Dahlia said, her voice stronger now. "But on one condition. Anything. You let me stand beside you as an equal partner, not someone you have to protect and shelter. I know I need help sometimes, and I am learning to accept that. But I will not be just a woman you rescued. I need to be more than that." Lucas pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. "Dahlia Green, you are the strongest woman I have ever met. Accepting help when you need it does not make you weak, it makes you smart. And I would never want you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Partners then. In this and in everything else if we make it that far." "We will make it that far," Dahlia said with certainty. She had spent months being afraid, being alone, letting pride nearly destroy her. But now she had Lucas, and together they were stronger than apart. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. That night, Dahlia lay in her bed listening to the sounds of the forest and knowing Lucas was out there, watching over her. Despite the danger looming on the horizon, she felt more at peace than she had in a long time. Love had found her in the most unexpected way, and she was not going to let anyone take that away from her. The next morning, true to his word, Lucas taught Dahlia to shoot properly. They set up targets behind the cabin and spent hours practicing, Lucas patiently correcting her stance and aim until she could hit the center of a target more often than not. "You are a natural," he said approvingly. "But remember, shooting at a target is different from shooting at a person. If it comes to that, do not hesitate. These men will not show you any mercy." "I understand," Dahlia said, though the thought of actually shooting someone made her stomach turn. She hoped it would not come to that. For the next 3 days, nothing happened. Lucas stayed close, working on improving the cabin's defenses and teaching Dahlia everything he knew about survival and self-protection. They cooked meals together, talked for hours about everything and nothing, and stole kisses when the work was done. It felt like they were building something real and lasting, a foundation for a future together. But the peace could not last forever. On the 4th night, Dahlia woke to the sound of breaking glass. She grabbed her rifle and rolled out of bed, her heart hammering in her chest. Through the window, she could see dark figures moving around the cabin, at least 4 or 5 of them. She fired a warning shot through the window, shattering what was left of the glass, and heard a man curse in pain. Then she ran to the door, making sure it was barred securely. "Dahlia!" Lucas's voice shouted from outside, followed by the sound of gunshots. She could hear men yelling, horses whinnying in distress, more shots being fired. The battle seemed to be moving away from the cabin, and Dahlia made a split-second decision. She unbarred the door and stepped outside, rifle raised. In the moonlight, she could see Lucas grappling with one man while trying to fend off another. Further out, she could see more figures on horseback. Dahlia aimed carefully and fired, hitting the man closest to Lucas in the shoulder. He fell back with a scream, and Lucas took advantage of the distraction to land a solid punch on the other man's jaw, dropping him. "Get back inside!" Lucas shouted at her, but Dahlia was already moving, taking cover behind a water barrel as return fire peppered the area around her. She fired again, this time at one of the riders, and had the satisfaction of seeing him slump in his saddle. The fight was brief but intense. The attackers had expected to find a helpless woman alone in the cabin, not an armed couple ready to defend themselves. When 2 of their number were injured and a third fell from his horse, the rest decided discretion was the better part of valor and rode off into the night, their wounded going with them. Lucas ran to Dahlia, his hands running over her frantically. "Are you hurt? Did they hit you?" "I am fine," she gasped, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Are you all right? Few bruises, nothing serious." Lucas pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heart pounding as hard as her own. "You should have stayed inside like I told you. And let you fight them all alone. Not a chance." Dahlia pulled back to look at him. "Partners, remember, that means we stand together." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Lucas smiled. "You are going to give me gray hair before I am 30, you know that." "You will still be handsome with gray hair," Dahlia said, then surprised herself by laughing. It was a wild, slightly hysterical sound, but it felt good to laugh after being so frightened. Lucas kissed her hard and fast, then pulled away. "We need to get to town and report this to the sheriff. With witnesses to an actual attack, he can do something now. Can you ride?" "Yes," Dahlia said, already moving toward the barn. "But I need to get dressed first." 10 minutes later, they were riding hard toward Fort Garland, pushing their horses as fast as they dared in the darkness. They reached town just as dawn was breaking, and Lucas pounded on the sheriff's door until the man appeared, bleary-eyed and in his nightshirt. "The Hutchins gang attacked Dahlia's cabin tonight," Lucas said without preamble. "We fought them off, but they will be back. We need to end this now." Sheriff Harris snapped awake immediately. "Anyone killed?" No, but we wounded at least 2 of them, Dahlia said. They rode off to the north. If they are wounded, they will need to find a place to hole up and tend their injuries, the sheriff said, already reaching for his clothes. There is an old mining camp about 10 miles north of here. Abandoned years ago, but it still has buildings standing. Good place to hide. I will get a posse together and we will ride out within the hour. I am coming with you, Lucas said. Me too, Dahlia added. Both men looked at her in surprise. Miss Green, I appreciate your courage, but this is going to be dangerous, the sheriff said. These men will not surrender easily. Those men threatened me and attacked my home, Dahlia said firmly. I have every right to be there when justice is served. Besides, I proved tonight that I can hold my own in a fight. You could use every gun you can get. Sheriff Harris looked at Lucas, who shrugged. She is right. And honestly, she is a better shot than half the men in this town. Fine, the sheriff sighed. But you stay back when the shooting starts, understand? I do not want to explain to anyone how I got Daniel Green's daughter killed. I understand, Dahlia agreed, though she had no intention of hanging back if things got dangerous. The posse that assembled was 12 strong, made up of local ranchers, a few former soldiers, and anyone else who could ride and shoot. They headed north as the sun climbed higher, following the trail of blood and hoofprints the wounded gang members had left behind. Just as the sheriff had predicted, they found the Hutchins gang at the old mining camp. The outlaws had fortified themselves in the main building, and they opened fire as soon as the posse came into view. A brief but fierce gun battle erupted, with bullets flying in both directions. Dahlia took cover behind an overturned wagon and fired carefully, conserving her ammunition and making every shot count. She saw Lucas across the clearing, working with 2 other men to flank the building from the side. Her heart was in her throat every time she saw him exposed to enemy fire, but he moved with the confidence of a man who knew what he was doing. The fight lasted perhaps 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. Finally, with several more of their number wounded and no chance of escape, the Hutchins gang surrendered. Hutchins himself came out with his hands up, that scar on his face even more prominent in the harsh morning light. You have got no proof we did anything wrong, he snarled as the sheriff clamped irons on his wrists. Our word against yours. Actually, we have got these, Sheriff Harris said, holding up a saddlebag full of items clearly stolen from various homesteads and travelers. Plus the testimony of everyone here about the attack on Miss Green's property. Plus the fact that 2 of your men have fresh bullet wounds from that very attack. I would say we have got more than enough proof. Hutchins glared at Dahlia with such venom that she took an involuntary step back. Lucas was immediately at her side, one hand on his gun. You want to try something? He asked quietly, his voice cold as winter. Give me a reason. Hutchins wisely kept his mouth shut after that. The ride back to Fort Garland was almost celebratory, the men joking and laughing with the relief that comes after surviving danger. Dahlia rode beside Lucas, their legs occasionally brushing together, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had not been helpless. She had not needed to be rescued. She had stood and fought alongside the men and proven herself capable. But more than that, she had Lucas beside her, and that made all the difference. Back in town, people came out to congratulate the posse and hear the story of the fight. Dahlia found herself surrounded by women wanting to know every detail, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and admiration that quiet Dahlia Green had participated in taking down an outlaw gang. Mrs. Patterson pulled her aside with a knowing smile. I told you that man was smitten with you. The way he kept watching you during that whole fight, making sure you were safe, that is a man in love if I ever saw one. Dahlia blushed but could not stop smiling. I think you might be right. Of course I am right, Mrs. Patterson said with satisfaction. Now, what are you going to do about it? That was the question, was it not? Dahlia looked across the street to where Lucas was talking with the sheriff, his hat pushed back on his head, his face tired but happy. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and their eyes met. The smile he gave her was private and warm, full of promise. What was she going to do about it? She was going to grab hold of this unexpected gift with both hands and not let go. After giving their statements to the sheriff and ensuring the gang members were locked up securely, Lucas and Dahlia rode back to her cabin. The sun was setting by the time they arrived, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. They stood together on the porch, looking out at the view, neither quite ready to break the spell of the day. "Your cabin took some damage in the attack," Lucas said eventually. "That window needs replacing, and I saw bullet holes in the door. I can help you fix it up over the next few days." "I would like that," Dahlia said. Then, before she could lose her courage, she added, "I would like it if you stayed, not just to help with repairs. I mean permanently. Move your camp here, or better yet, move into the cabin, with me." Lucas turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Dahlia, are you sure? We have only known each other a few weeks. People will talk." "Let them talk," Dahlia said firmly. "I have spent the last 8 months alone, letting pride nearly kill me because I was too stubborn to ask for help or admit I needed someone. I am done with that. You are the best thing that has happened to me in longer than I can remember, and I am not going to waste time worrying about what is proper or what people might say. Life is too short and too hard out here to pass up happiness when you find it. You are sure?" Lucas asked again, but she could see hope blazing in his eyes. "I am sure," Dahlia confirmed. "I love you, Lucas Vance. I probably have since the 3rd morning I found food on my porch and realized someone cared enough to make sure I was surviving. Maybe it is fast, maybe it is reckless, but it is true." "I love you too," Lucas said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been trying to find the right time to tell you, but there never seemed to be a perfect moment. Though I suppose after fighting off an outlaw gang together is as good a time as any." They both laughed, and then Lucas was kissing her again, his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet with the intensity of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Dahlia said, "So is that a yes? You will stay?" "Try to make me leave," Lucas challenged. "Though I should mention, if we are going to live together, we should probably get married first. I know you do not care what people think, but I do not want anyone disrespecting you because of me." "Are you proposing?" Dahlia asked, her heart skipping a beat. "I do not have a ring yet, but yes, I suppose I am." Lucas took both her hands in his expression earnest. "Dahlia Green, will you marry me? I promise to love you, respect you, stand beside you as an equal partner, and spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on a wandering cowboy who fell in love with your stubborn pride." "Yes," Dahlia said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, sealing the promise between them, and in that moment, with the mountains around them and the stars beginning to appear overhead, Dahlia felt truly and completely happy for the first time since her father had died. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Fort Garland. It was a simple affair, but half the town showed up to witness the union of Dahlia Green and Lucas Vance. Dahlia wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Patterson, altered to fit her slender frame, and Lucas wore his best shirt and a vest he had bought specially for the occasion. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The sheriff gave Dahlia away, having known her father and feeling it his duty to stand in. When Lucas slipped a simple gold band on Dahlia's finger and the minister pronounced them man and wife, The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. At the reception held in the church hall afterward, people came up to congratulate them and offer gifts. Some brought food, others brought household items, and a few generous souls contributed money or livestock to help the newlyweds get started. Dahlia was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from a community she had been too proud to ask for help from. "I should have reached out sooner," she said to Lucas as they watched people dancing and celebrating. "I wasted so much time being stubborn." "You reached out when you were ready," Lucas said, pulling her close. "And everything worked out the way it was supposed to. We found each other, and that is what matters." They danced together as the evening wore on, Lucas holding her close and whispering plans for their future in her ear. They would expand the cabin, he said. Add another room or two for when children came. They would build up the herd, maybe get some cattle of their own to go with the chickens and the goat. They would plant a bigger garden, maybe even some apple trees. They would build a life together in these mountains, facing whatever challenges came with the certainty that they were stronger together than apart. When the celebration finally wound down and people started heading home, Lucas and Dahlia rode back to the cabin together under a moon so bright it seemed like day. They were both tired but happy, ready to start their new life together. That first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a physical expression of all the love and trust they had built over the past weeks. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Dahlia's small bed, talking quietly about everything and nothing until sleep finally claimed them both. The weeks that followed were busy ones. True to his word, Lucas began expanding the cabin, adding a larger bedroom and a proper kitchen. Dahlia's garden flourished under their combined care, producing more vegetables than they could eat themselves. They sold the surplus in town, slowly building up a small nest egg of savings. Clover the goat had kids that spring, giving them the start of a herd. The chickens multiplied as well, and soon they had fresh eggs to sell along with the vegetables. Lucas took on occasional work with the cattle drives, but he always came home to Dahlia, never gone for more than a few days at a time. But the best news came 4 months after their wedding, when Dahlia realized she had missed her monthly time twice in a row. She told Lucas over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her, processing the information. Then a huge smile broke across his face, and he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and protested that he would make her dizzy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Dahlia asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Lucas said, setting her down gently and placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "You have made me the happiest man alive, Dahlia Vance." Hearing her married name still gave Dahlia a little thrill. She was no longer Dahlia Green, alone and struggling. She was Dahlia Vance, loved and cherished, building a future with a good man in the mountains she had come to love. The pregnancy was not easy. Morning sickness plagued her for months, and as her belly grew, the physical work of maintaining the homestead became increasingly difficult. But Lucas was there every step of the way, taking on the heavier chores without complaint, making sure she ate properly and rested when she needed to. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing advice and baby clothes she had saved from when her own children were small. The women of Fort Garland organized a quilting bee and presented Dahlia with a beautiful baby quilt made from scraps of fabric they had all contributed. Dahlia was moved to tears by the gesture, by this community that had embraced her once she stopped being too proud to let them in. The baby came on a cold December night in 1879, almost exactly a year after Lucas had left that first bundle of food on her porch. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Dahlia was certain she could not do it. But Lucas held her hand through it all, whispering encouragement and love, and Mrs. Patterson coached her through each contraction with the calm authority of someone who had birthed 6 children of her own. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, Dahlia's son entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to shake the cabin walls. Lucas wept openly as Mrs. Patterson placed the baby in his arms, this tiny perfect person they had created together. "He is beautiful," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. "He looks like you." "He has your nose," Dahlia said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but had never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son's scrunched-up face, Lucas said, "What about Daniel, after your father, and we could call him Danny for short?" Tears spilled down Dahlia's cheeks. "You would do that?" "Your father helped my uncle when he needed it, which led to me meeting you," Lucas said. "I would not be here, holding my son, if not for him. It seems fitting to honor his memory." So Daniel Lucas Vance became part of their family, a tiny red-faced bundle who demanded constant attention and gave nothing but joy in return. Dahlia discovered depths of love she had not known existed, watching Lucas rock their son to sleep or make silly faces to get him to smile. This was the life she had never dared to dream of, back when she was alone and starving and too proud to admit she needed help. The years passed quickly after that, filled with the everyday joys and challenges of building a life together. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose who arrived 2 years after Danny, and another son named James who came 3 years after that. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the homestead prospered under their combined efforts. Lucas's reputation as a reliable, hard-working man grew, and he was offered a position as foreman on one of the larger ranches in the area. The steady income allowed them to buy more land and expand their own herd. Dahlia took in sewing and mending to earn extra money, and her skills became well known throughout Fort Garland. They faced hardships, of course. There were dry summers when the crops failed and harsh winters when they lost livestock to cold and predators. Rose got sick with scarlet fever when she was 4, and they spent 3 terrifying weeks nursing her back to health. Lucas broke his leg in a riding accident and was laid up for months, forcing Dahlia to manage the ranch largely on her own. But through it all, they had each other. On the hard days, they drew strength from their partnership, from the knowledge that they were in this together. On the good days, they celebrated with their children and their community, grateful for the life they had built. One morning, about 7 years after that first bundle of food had appeared on Dahlia's porch, she woke to find Lucas already up and dressed. This was unusual, as he usually lingered in bed with her for a few quiet moments before the children woke up. "Where are you going so early?" she asked, sitting up and pushing her dark hair out of her face. Lucas smiled mysteriously. "It is a surprise. Get dressed and come outside." Curious, Dahlia threw on her clothes and followed him out to the porch. There, sitting exactly where those first mysterious gifts had appeared, was a beautifully carved wooden rocking chair. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every curve and joint perfectly made, and cushions in a bright floral fabric were tied to the seat and back. "I made it for you," Lucas said, watching her face anxiously. "I have been working on it for months whenever I had spare time. I know how much you love sitting out here in the evenings watching the sunset, and I thought you deserved a proper chair to sit in." Dahlia ran her hands over the smooth wood, tears pricking her eyes. "Lucas, it is beautiful, but why today?" Because today is the anniversary of the first time I left food on your porch, he said. 7 years ago, I put that first bundle of bread and bacon right where this chair is sitting now, and it changed both our lives. I wanted to mark the occasion with something special. Dahlia threw her arms around his neck, kissing him soundly. I love it. I love you. Thank you for being too stubborn to take no for an answer, for seeing past my pride to what I really needed. We saved each other, Lucas said, holding her close. You were too proud to ask for help, and I was too lonely to stop offering it. Turned out we were exactly what each other needed. They stood together on the porch, the morning sun warming their faces, looking out at the land they had built into a home. Inside, their children were starting to stir, and soon the day's work would begin. But for this moment, Dahlia and Lucas simply held each other, grateful for food left on a porch, for pride that bent but did not break, for love that found a way against all odds. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Danny grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved working with the cattle like his father. Rose was bright and imaginative, always making up stories and putting on plays for the family. James was the wild one, constantly getting into mischief and keeping Dahlia on her toes. Lucas's parents made the long journey from Texas to meet their grandchildren when Danny was 8, and Dahlia loved seeing Lucas reunite with his family after so many years apart. His mother was a small, fierce woman who reminded Dahlia of herself, and they became fast friends. His father was quiet but kind, and he spent hours teaching Danny and Rose card games and rope tricks. Your mother would have liked them, Lucas said one night as they lay in bed after his parents had returned to Texas. And they would have liked her. I think so too, Dahlia agreed. She wished her father could have met Lucas, could have seen the grandchildren that bore his name and his features. But she felt his presence sometimes in the wind that rustled through the pines, in the strength she found to face each new day. He had taught her to be independent, and that lesson had served her well, even if she had taken it to extremes for a while. When Danny turned 16, he started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Emma, who made him smile in a way that reminded Dahlia of how Lucas had made her feel at that age. It was strange and wonderful to watch her son experience first love, to see the cycle beginning again. Are we old enough to have a son who is courting? She asked Lucas one evening as they sat together in the rocking chair he had made her, which was still her favorite place to watch the sunset. Speak for yourself. I am still young and spry, Lucas teased, then yelped when she elbowed him in the ribs. But yes, it is strange how fast time passes. Seems like yesterday we were standing in that church getting married, and now our oldest is talking about marriage himself. Do you think Danny will stay on the ranch? Dahlia asked. Or will he want to make his own way like you did? Hard to say, Lucas mused. But whatever he decides, we will support him, just like your father would have supported whatever choices you made. The mention of her father made Dahlia smile. You know, I used to think about what he would have said about me accepting help from you, whether he would have been disappointed that I was not strong enough to make it on my own. And now I think he would have been proud that I was smart enough to recognize when I needed help and humble enough to accept it, Dahlia said. That takes a different kind of strength, one I did not understand back then. Lucas kissed the top of her head. You are the strongest person I know, Dahlia Vance. You always have been. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ranch was prosperous now, the cabin had grown into a proper house, and their children were healthy and happy. It was more than Dahlia had ever dared to hope for during those dark months when she was alone and starving and too stubborn to ask for help. More years passed, and the children grew up and started lives of their own. Danny married Emma and took over the management of the ranch, building his own house on the far corner of the property. Rose moved to Denver to become a teacher, writing long letters home filled with descriptions of city life and the students she adored. James followed in his father's footsteps and became a cowboy, working cattle drives throughout Colorado and Wyoming but always returning home between jobs. Lucas and Dahlia grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down but their love as strong as ever. They became grandparents many times over, and their house was always full of visiting children and grandchildren who wanted to hear stories about the old days in the Wild West. One of the grandchildren's favorite stories was about how Lucas and Dahlia had met, about the food left on the porch, and the stubborn woman who was too proud to ask for help. The children would gasp at the part about the outlaw attack and cheer when they heard how their grandmother had stood and fought alongside the men. "Tell us again how Grandpa proposed," they would beg, and Lucas would smile and recount the story of asking Dahlia to marry him on the porch of the cabin, right after they had helped bring down an outlaw gang. "Your grandmother has never done anything the easy way," he would say, winking at Dahlia. "She needed to be sure I could handle a strong woman before she agreed to marry me." "And have I ever let you down?" Dahlia would ask. "Not once," Lucas would reply seriously. "Not in all these years. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Dahlia Vance." On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch to celebrate. Danny and Emma had 4 children now. Rose had married a lawyer in Denver and had 3 children of her own. James had finally settled down with a rancher's daughter from Wyoming, and they had twins on the way. The party lasted all day, with music and dancing and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it. As the sun began to set, Lucas led Dahlia away from the crowd to the porch, to the rocking chair he had made for her all those years ago. 30 years, he said, pulling her into his arms. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just got married yesterday." "It has been a good life," Dahlia said, leaning into his embrace. "Better than I ever imagined possible during those hard months before you came along. Do you ever regret not asking for help sooner? All those months you struggled alone." Dahlia considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I regret the pain and the hunger and the fear, but I do not regret the person it made me become. If I had not been so stubborn and proud, maybe you would not have noticed me. Maybe we would not have this life we built together." "I would have noticed you no matter what," Lucas said firmly. "You were impossible not to notice even back then, but I understand what you mean. Everything we went through, all the hard times and the struggles, they made us stronger. They taught us to appreciate what we have." "And what we have is pretty wonderful," Dahlia said, gesturing to the party happening in their yard, to the children and grandchildren who had gathered to celebrate their love. "The best," Lucas agreed. "Though I still think the best part is this, right here. You and me, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, just like we have done for 30 years. As if on cue, their family began calling for them to come back to the party. There was a special cake to cut, gifts to open, more stories to tell. But for just a moment longer, Lucas and Dahlia stayed where they were, holding each other and watching the sun sink behind the mountains they had made their home. "I love you," Dahlia said softly. "Thank you for leaving food on my porch all those years ago, for being patient with my pride, for showing me that accepting help does not make you weak." "I love you too," Lucas replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy, for standing beside me as an equal partner, for building this beautiful life with me." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of love and laughter and shared trials. Then, hand in hand, They returned to their family to celebrate the love story that had begun with a stubborn woman who was too proud to ask for help and a cowboy who left food on her porch every morning, until she learned that accepting love and support was not a weakness but a strength. The party continued late into the night, with grandchildren falling asleep in their parents' arms and the adults talking and laughing around a bonfire Danny had built. Stories were told and retold, each one adding to the mythology of the family. The foundation that Lucas and Dahlia had built through hard work, determination, and most of all, love. As the years continued to advance, Lucas and Dahlia finally stepped back from the daily management of the ranch, letting Danny and his family take over completely. They spent their days in the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage, tending a small garden, visiting with neighbors and grandchildren, and sitting on the porch in the evening watching the world go by. Lucas's health began to fail when he was in his early 70s. It started small, just a persistent cough and some fatigue, but it gradually worsened until the doctor finally diagnosed him with a failing heart. There was nothing to be done except make him comfortable and wait for the inevitable. Dahlia nursed him through it with the same fierce determination she had brought to everything else in her life. She refused to let him see her cry, saving her tears for the private moments when he was sleeping. During his waking hours, she was cheerful and optimistic, reading to him, talking about the grandchildren, reminding him of all the good years they had shared together. "I am sorry," Lucas said one afternoon as they sat together on the porch, his hand clasped in hers. "I promised you a lifetime together, and it is not going to be as long as I hoped." "We have had nearly 40 years," Dahlia said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill over. "That is more than many people get. We have loved each other well, Lucas Vance. We have built a family and a legacy that will continue long after we are gone. You have nothing to apologize for." "I will miss you," he said quietly. "Wherever I am going, whatever comes next, I will miss you until you join me there." "Then I will try not to keep you waiting too long," Dahlia said, trying to smile through her grief. "But I have got grandchildren to spoil and a ranch to help oversee. You might have to be patient with me." Lucas laughed, then started coughing. When he finally caught his breath again, he said, "I will wait forever if I have to. You are worth it." He died 3 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep with Dahlia holding his hand. The funeral was the largest Fort Garland had seen in years, with people coming from all over Colorado to pay their respects to Lucas Vance, a good man who had lived a good life and left the world better than he found it. Dahlia stood at the graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and said goodbye to the love of her life. She did not cry during the service, staying strong for the family that looked to her for guidance. But that night, alone in the house that was too quiet without Lucas's presence, she finally allowed herself to grieve. She sat in the rocking chair he had made for her and wept, mourning not just the man but the life they had built together, the partnership that had sustained them through so many trials. She had been too proud to ask for help once, but Lucas had helped her anyway, and that had made all the difference. The months after Lucas's death were difficult. Dahlia felt unmoored, adrift without the anchor of his presence. But her children rallied around her, visiting frequently, making sure she was eating properly and not isolating herself too much. The grandchildren came to stay with her sometimes, filling the house with noise and laughter, and reminding her that life continued even in the midst of grief. Slowly, painfully, Dahlia learned to live without Lucas. She found purpose in helping Danny and Emma with the ranch, in teaching her granddaughters to sew and cook, in writing letters to Rose in Denver full of family news and grandmother wisdom. She kept the rocking chair on the porch and sat in it every evening, talking to Lucas as if he could hear her, telling him about her day and the family they had created together. The years passed, and Dahlia grew old with grace and dignity. Her children and grandchildren cared for her as she had once cared for them, the circle completing itself. She lived to see great-grandchildren born, tiny squirming bundles who would never meet Lucas but would grow up hearing stories about him. On a warm summer evening when Dahlia was 83 years old, she sat in her rocking chair watching the sunset like she had done thousands of times before. The mountains were beautiful, painted in shades of gold and purple that never got old no matter how many times she saw them. The ranch below was bustling with activity as Danny's children and grandchildren went about their evening chores. Dahlia felt peaceful, content with the life she had lived. She thought about that young woman who had been too proud to ask for help, who had nearly starved rather than admit she needed someone. That woman seemed like a stranger now, though Dahlia could still remember the desperation and fear that had driven her. She thought about Lucas, about the food he had left on her porch every morning until she learned to accept it, about the patience and kindness he had shown her, seeing past her prickly pride to the strong woman underneath, about the love they had built together, a partnership of equals that had lasted nearly 40 years. "I am ready," she said quietly to the empty air, though perhaps it was not so empty after all. "I have lived a good life, Lucas. I am ready to see you again." That night, Dahlia Vance died peacefully in her sleep, slipping away so quietly that it was morning before anyone realized she was gone. They found her in bed with a small smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful in her last moments. The funeral was another huge affair, with people coming from all over to pay tribute to Dahlia Green Vance, who had survived alone in the mountains through sheer stubbornness, who had learned to accept help and love, who had built a family and a legacy that would continue for generations. They buried her next to Lucas, under a pine tree with a view of the mountains they had both loved. On her headstone, Danny had inscribed the words, "She was too proud to ask for help, but she was strong enough to accept it. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend." The ranch continued to thrive under Danny's leadership and eventually passed to his children and then to their children. The rocking chair Lucas had made stayed on the porch, a family heirloom that each generation treasured. And the story of how Lucas and Dahlia met, of food left on a porch and pride that nearly killed but finally bent, was passed down through the years, a testament to the power of love, patience, and the courage it takes to accept help when you need it most. In Fort Garland, Colorado, in the Wild West of the late 1800s, a stubborn woman and a patient cowboy had found each other against all odds. They had built a love that lasted a lifetime and created a family that would remember their story for generations to come. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all, greater than land or wealth or anything else. They had loved each other well, and that love had rippled out into the world, touching countless lives and making everything a little bit better. The mountains stood eternal, watching over the ranch where Lucas and Dahlia had built their life together. The seasons changed, years turned to decades, but the story remained, a reminder that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is admit they need help. And sometimes the kindest thing a person can do is offer help to someone too proud to ask for it. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, those two people find each other and build something beautiful that lasts long after they are gone.